Martin's Place is brought to you by Ortus Financial, Australia's most influential lending, advisory and broking business. Insightful, trusted, yours.
Hello and welcome to Martin's Place, where you'll meet and be part of a conversation with some of Australia's most interesting and influential people. I'm Martin Lakos, and joining me today is a former Macquarie Bank colleague who did join as a cadet in 2001. He's certainly got well known in Macquarie as one of the key salespeople in the debt and finance space. So joining me is Adam Rakowski. Adam, welcome.
Great to be here, Martin.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me.
Pleasure.
Now, I don't normally start these conversations with sort of on a timeline, but given you a little bit of family history, I thought we'd start with that. So your parents were Polish immigrants coming to Australia and basically landed virtually with nothing. But there's quite a bit of interesting family history back in Poland.
Correct, indeed. Yeah, I was born in Warsaw in Poland, and this was during the late 80s, so there was a bit of upheaval politically, and my grandfather was in the government at the time. And
not only was he the government, he was the last prime minister of the communist government, and he oversaw the shift out of communism.
Indeed, no, you're right. And I think at the time, my parents were sort of in the early 20s, and me as a one-year-old, a bit of upheaval, not knowing what would happen. Martial law was being, thrown around, and I think that Dad made the choice with Mum to get up out of there while they could. And we had a friend in Australia, had a friend overseas, and they were trying to work out where to go, and we landed in Australia. But
how did they make that choice?
Look, it wasn't that scientific. I wish it was, but a bit of a funny story. There was one family that moved to Ashfield in Sydney, which a lot of the Polish community are in Sydney, and they had a friend in Chicago, and as my dad told me, literally tossed the coin because he only had a day or a night to make the choice. He got a phone call saying that the tanks could be rolling into Warsaw, so it was no time to be scientific. And thankfully for me, it was heads and Sydney, because I don't know if you've been to Chicago in January, Martin. It is not pleasant.
Well, Australia's all the better for that coin cost. There's no question about that. But that's an amazing family history. So let's sort of fast forward a little bit. You graduated, joined Macquarie through the graduate program, and joined the banking financial services team, and quickly moved into the debt financing arena in the financial space. And you obviously found a niche because you were sort of quite quickly, there was accolades around your salesmanship in terms of, volume of lending and your understanding, but it was all around, so much around, putting the client first.
Indeed, and look back then, I was fortunate, Martin. A lot of that cadet program, you were encouraged to, or I guess you moved around a bit. So I suppose the sales function, as we all know, is often just the head of the snake. There's a lot of parts that go to it, and I think I was fortunate. Again, back then there were no email wasn't just coming in. There were a lot of fax machines. So I think that I got to meet a lot of the incredible people in the sales environment by virtue of them coming down to my desk and giving me a rather manual task, and I got to have conversations and connect and hear their stories, and like many things, and that was the foundation of meeting people and having those relationships.
And my experience certainly is you're a great networker because we work together and we've done a few things together over the years. But you decided to leave Macquarie. What was behind that?
Gosh, it was a tough decision. Like my father, was a career Macquarie banker, so I saw him grow and flourish, and he loved the organisation. He was there, I think, 30 years in the end, and it was very much part of who I was before I even joined. So it was a very tough decision for me, and I love Macquarie. I still, to this day, it's a huge part of my life. A lot of my friends are there. But my wife and I have been married 10 years. We had our first baby on the way.
Yeah.
And it was a moment where I was just sitting in a room, a bit like this, with a few of my colleagues, listening but reflecting at the same time as to my journey and thinking, gosh, I'm going to be a father. And that sort of Macquarie spirit came out entrepreneurially. I thought maybe I should look at doing something for myself. And I think that I love the client interaction, the problem solving, and
You're very good at it.
well, look, I think I was given a great environment to learn at Macquarie. As you know, a lot of incredible people have come through there, and I had the good fortune to have some amazing mentors. And for me, I was always encouraged to I guess, grow. But I just thought, look, I'd learn a lot. I'd been there sort of 10 years at that time at Macquarie, and I wanted to be involved with the client. I felt I was slowly being positioned in a role where I was more strategic, which again was fine, but my natural passion to this day is really helping the client.
So took a bit of a risk, started a business, didn't quite work out, and pivoted pretty quickly and started your own business, Ortus Financial. So I've got to ask the obvious question, what does Ortus stand for?
Look, I'm not the most creative person, Martin, I'll admit that, but when we pivoted from that initial business and had to think really quickly, my wife and I put our heads together. At school, I learned Latin all the way through. Loved that foundation, and I Googled rebirth in Latin. I think I did, and that's what Ortus stands for. Okay. It's the second coming, a new beginning, which I think it was very much at that time, and it was as simple as that.
And what a great decision, along with a great name, because you've just continued to exceed expectations. I think Ortus now has been certainly in the top 100 breaking, if not better than that, and consistently voted as top sales group. But it's been really quite interesting because a good entrepreneur, which clearly you've got to consider yourself as one, surrounds themselves with really good talent. So where have you extracted that talent from?
Yeah, again, I was very. It's
a leading question, right?
Yes. Well, look, again, I mentioned Macquarie. I look back every day and am thankful for what I learnt at Macquarie, who I met, the leaders I had, the relationships I formed, and it was for my formative years in a professional sense incredible. And I met a lot of people there who, to this day are good friends. We're talking, 25 years.
Yeah.
And so when I left, I guess I was, thankfully very self-aware in terms of what I was good at, and I was always good at driving a client outcome and fighting for the client. And where I guess needed help is in managing the business. As you would know, I think a lot of good salespeople are challenged when they have to think more broadly and manage. And I knew that operations wasn't my strong suit, so I always felt very dear to my heart. I needed to bring in people who I trusted, and so Macquarie became the place that I first had conversations. Again, very mindful that I didn't want to, did it the right way. And these were 2 or 3 years ahead of time.
Right.
So it was always part of the plan to grow. The pace has been much faster than I'd thought, but I think to your point earlier, you put good people together that have a shared vision and understand and had that trust. It's sort of taken off a bit faster than we thought.
So you've undertaken this new enterprise, and you've mentioned your wife. You've now got 2 young boys. At the ages where they're pretty busy, right?
Indeed.
Lots of sport, lots of playing taxi service on weekends. But that was a pretty bold thing to do with a very young family. How's all that panning out? Particularly from a work-life balance for you and your wife.
It's definitely a work in progress, and I think that my father sort of worked very hard, and my mother, when we first came to Australia, I didn't mention there that they were working shift work effectively. So there was a lot of, I didn't see them much, quite frankly. I do remember, one would come home, one would leave, and Macquarie was fantastic. But I thought if I ever had the chance to run my own business and have a bit more scope to apply my own hours, I promised that I would try and be there for my kids. And I'm not perfect, Martin.
Sure.
My wife would attest to that, but certainly I'm acutely aware of that. And things like school carnivals, those sort of simple things that I certainly remember, and most kids remember their parents attending. I think that that's really important to me. And as, again, having the team around me, they always encourage me to give more time to myself, because I do tend to overwork. And again, I'm still young at 46, and I don't have any plans to stop. So it's really important that we have that balance. And again, my wife is very understanding and accommodating, where I do have my shortcomings still.
But you do have one very specific personal outlet, so to speak. and that's around horse breeding and the races, but you've got more interest, I think, is my understanding, in horse breeding and putting syndicates together. Is that right?
It is indeed. And again, there's a Macquarie link to
Real
that.
love.
Yeah. Well, look, I think you definitely need a third wheel. There's work and family, and in terms of getting energy and feeling re-energized, it might sound odd, but the horse racing industry and the breeding industry is one that I love. I had a client when I was at Macquarie that I was lucky enough to be part of their world, a country family, but they sort of showed me the ropes as a very young person. Now, this is quite a large corporate business, but the roots were very much in a family business, and so I loved the diversity of their people, which is what really underpins my love of the industry. I have a few horses now, Martin. I won't divulge the full number in case my wife is watching. But look, we had one horse in particular which did quite well, and we had a stevedore in that horse, and we had a person linked to the British royal family.
Oh,
so
wow.
You had that
amazing networking.
Yeah, and just that sort of common ground, but yet very, very different background. So that really appeals to me, and I love that part of it.
No, I guess to some extent you've talked quite fondly and understandably so of your time at Macquarie, and I guess to some extent we have found, for those who've worked at Macquarie in the past, not only a very strong culture and around system of behaviours and whatever else, which by the sounds of things you've probably exported into your own business, but having also people from Macquarie Bank and Rabobank, I believe, that culture and behaviours are so important, particularly around the ethics of doing business. I think it's one of the things that Ortus stands out.
Look, absolutely. I mean, when we had the plan to really grow, and everyone was aligned, it's a long-term play. This isn't a case of us having a plan to execute to and grow to a point and sell this, Martin. This is genuinely like a passion project, and I think Macquarie, again, when I was there, it was very much about retention, keeping, and the clients were and are at the centre of what we do. But it's more than that; it's being actively involved. I think that the balance between running a business and also being there for the clients, those that trusted you in the early days. I certainly have a lot of clients who I met at Macquarie, and through growth, they're still really in our lives, so to speak, professionally, and that does mean a lot. You look back, and loyalty is a really powerful thing, and something that I'm thankful for every day. And so we are a very client-centric organisation. A lot of people talk about it, but
but it's real.
It's real.
Yeah,
it's real.
Yeah.
And this is where I guess we've evolved to, and the current market I think really needs this advisory and genuine long-term thinking mindset. Obviously, the industry is transactional, certainly portrayed that way, but in reality, firms like ours are really about being there for people and families for generations. Yeah,
and that sort of legacy across in family or family offices or whatever else, to have that to some extent being known as that trusted advisor, you don't get that straight away. You've got to earn that, and it takes quite some time. Not only in the original generation that you've developed a relationship with, and future generations as well. And I have no doubt that's sort of where you're heading towards as well. So while we're talking about the markets now, obviously the budget is being well publicised. We know all the details, but give us some sense of what's happening in the lending and finance advisory world at this point in time. What's the reaction been, and are we seeing a change in behaviours? And is it a dramatic change?
Yes, it is quite dramatic. I think, look, my phone rings all day, every day, so the actual frequency of calls is the same, but calls are going for longer. People are worried or apprehensive, and it's about not knowing. The sands shift so quickly, and I think this budget came at a time which there already is some uncertainty. So there's a lot of dialogue about what ifs, and people wanting to understand their options, and people who want to buy time. So to the advisory and that trusted advisor comment, they seek us out for their our views and thoughts on not just one option, but 10 options,
right,
and then helping them decide. So, and I don't see this changing. The pace of change with bank policy. Look at Macquarie have been so successful, well publicised in the retail mortgage channel, and each bank, I guess, chooses their bit, but it's hard to follow if you're just the client. You've got your own life, and your own family. So our job is to maintain that connectivity to the market and understand the changes, which they are never ending. And again, and giving actual advice. Obviously, just knowing the clients the way we do and their aspirations and their background, we are uniquely placed to actually have a conversation with a lender around not just the transaction, but where they're trying to go. And it's all about framing that in the right way and making sure we're giving them the best chance of success.
And given the details, or what we know of the budget, potential budget changes, in the lending spectrum, so from retail mortgage to financing commercial property and bigger ticket items, are you finding there's a universal change in behaviours, or is it quite noticeable at different levels of that lending spectrum?
Different levels. I think it's manifesting in different ways. So at the traditional retail end, people understandably are pausing in many ways what they're doing. But importantly, they're still having the conversations with us, because again, I think that it's important to have an idea of where it could go and optionality, because when it happens, it's often too late.
Yeah.
And we often hear people saying to us, we're going to pause and wait for the market to drop. And of course, it's too late when that happens. But the biggest trend is in that sort of self-employed space, or Martin, where there's a case of people have material balance sheets, but might have multiple income sources, or cash flow can be up and down. It's about buying time and giving people optionality again. And that, I would say, where that was a third of my time, it's now 90% of my time with these families and professionals, self-employed, that are wanting to, or had a plan to do something with a certain timeline that now they're wanting to review because of the changes, and understanding ahead of time again, so they're not stuck in a corner. And that advisory mindset, again, it's really sort of becoming more and more of a thing post-budget.
And are you, in terms of the advisory side on finance and lending, is it across all asset classes, or is it the majority would be property, I would guess, but is there a bit of a mix in that?
There's a big mix. I think a lot of firms will portray themselves to be end to end, and I think for us, because whilst we had a lot of Macquarie staff that work, we have a very diverse range of people, and we have 10 offices across the country, and agri finance is a huge part of what we do. So of course, financing a cotton picker in terms of asset finance is very different to funding a commercial office. But we do a lot of cash flow, unsecured finance. So of course, Macquarie, we're the leaders in this space and innovators in terms of providing debt to emerging corporates. They can be listed companies where there's no hard property security, but just understanding cash flow. So I think that pedigree in terms of Macquarie, where you look at cash flow, character, those key tenets, that very much is what we do. But often, probably the key piece to tie together, Martin, is a lot of our clients will have an operating business or a property business, right, have a personal business. And I think, ironically, having them all in the one pool with the one bank, increasingly problematic, because of course people want to have their personal aspirations and their business ones, and sometimes it's not easy to pull. So again, that advisory piece with us at the centre, often understanding across all asset classes, we can pick and choose the best providers, we can manage that relationship, and that is where the industry, I think, is evolving to more broadly. So
you're finding more and more that a family or an individual that's got largely one banker, more inflexibility is starting to emerge, and therefore...
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so for them to have a second banker provides that additional flexibility.
Indeed, and I've often, again, in the Macquarie world, it was, as you would know, very common for a family on the investment side of the balance sheet to have more than one advisor. And if nothing else for risk management, but just to have that. On the debt side, it's been traditionally not the case. So we saw a client last week who has been with the CBA for 80 years through a family business, and so a real long-standing relationship. Very loyal, and they came to us to get a sense check. And what we saw very quickly was that everything was sort of taken together, and it wasn't that it was bad, but it could be a lot better. It was inefficient. Right. So, and to tie back to my previous comment, Martin, the patriarch in that sense wanted to do something to help his children, but was having issues because the actual business and properties was all tied together. And by sort of pulling out one little Jenga piece here, it was going to create havoc. But you look at the actual underlying business, phenomenal. So again, it's this idea that loyalty is important, but equally you need to look at the bigger picture these days. And again, that's where we come in and make sure that it's structured the best possible way.
High degrees of complexity.
Yes.
You mentioned agriculture. So are there specific segments that you feel you've got some expertise in? And how have you got that expertise? I mean, how long has it taken to develop that expertise in the agricultural sector, as an example?
Look, I won't profess to be an expert. I think I had that horse thoroughbred things an adjacency, but I got to meet the people and ethically, the type of people they are, honest, forthright, loyal. That really appealed to me. And through a client of ours who we helped many years ago, who was himself worked at Rabobank, and I first got an insight into their part of the market, and they're huge in agri, and got to know him. He was from Orange, good country boy, a great family, and we were talking one day, much in the same way that I had the idea about starting Ortus, and he'd always harboured aspirations to have a crack, so to speak, and we said, let's do it, and he came across with another colleague, and to your question, it's a very niche part of the market. Obviously,
Sure.
I'd be probably called a Pitt Street farmer, Martin, where but they live and breathe that, and we're talking cattle, dairy.
Right. Quite substantial
And,
holdings and businesses.
Yeah, and even within there, they're all very different. So,
Yeah.
and I think the banks that play in that space are different to the banks that play in our sort of private office space. So it was very clear to me, it's a key part of our business, and it's staffed in a way that has people who can talk to people in the way that we would talk to ours. Again, but often underserviced. So this is agri is a huge part of our economy. But if you look at the debt advisors or brokers that play in the traditional space versus the actual agri space, it's a lot smaller than the part of the market, but underserviced in my opinion.
So, and what would be the from a segment perspective, what would be the next biggest part of your business outside of agriculture, or is it commercial property as against residential?
It's a fairly even split, but in terms of, it would be the commercial, or we call Ortus Private. So again, those more sophisticated borrowers that might have multiple asset classes.
Yeah.
So invariably we will act across, and that could be helping the kids with a property, so that in isolation is retail. There might be a commercial office involved. There'll be a farm where they might have to have some kit they want to buy for the farm. So we have sort of a very large business. So we are top 10 in the country in terms of pure footings. But I think beyond that, the high growth areas would be the agri finance and this private client space, and that's not defined by size. So it just the requirements are more complex than a simple loan.
Yeah.
And we apply that private mindset, which again, Macquarie was so important in that regard, and understanding how people think and how
Establish those foundations for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there parallels between? I was about to say you're probably the top end of a small business, but you're no longer a small business at all. But are there parallels now in terms of how the economy is going? What you're seeing on the lending side or the borrowing side by clients and customers, as against how you have to operate your business, the red tape, rising interest rates, all those sorts of things. How are you seeing the economy from your business perspective now?
I think we have 40-odd staff, so certainly in terms of how we operate, there's a lot of rigour around risk management and frameworks and corporate governance. And I think, again, relying heavily on Macquarie Bank, past risk management, as you know, was always a huge part of
Absolutely.
What we were doing. And in fact, in my case back then, Martin, I was put through a risk team and a role for 2 or 3 years prior to being allowed to be a salesperson, because of course it's a really equal balance there. But it's more through the lens of the clients. I think that banks are being more policy driven. Again, back in the day, the old where you walk into your bank manager, whether you're in a country town or in the city, and you could say, "Oh, Martin, this is what I need," and you could sign it off effectively there and then. I think now all that sort of stuff has been removed. So people, whilst they might be wanting to help you on a human level, they just can't, because it's understandably more policy driven. So there's a lot of red tape, and I think clients who had it one way and are used to having things done in a seamless fashion grow increasingly frustrated. And I think more broadly, when you overlay some of the challenges economically, again, it's about untangling that red tape bureaucracy and simplifying the process, because there's no reason why it can't be the way it was. It's often the case of just knowing who to call and what to say.
Yeah.
So that complexity, again, even if I compare when we started Ortus 10 years ago to now, you can't recognise the difference. It's 10 times more complex for no real reason.
Yeah. And in those discussions with your clients and customers, do you actually take a view, for example, on interest rates or inflation? Or is it more from an advisory perspective, there's optionality in saying, well, if this happens, then there'd have to be an expectation for rates to go up or rates to go down or rates to be on hold. How do you handle those conversations?
My view has always been to be really honest, and we treat our clients like peers, like friends, like contemporaries. And I think having a conversation, of course, that is measured, but we give opinions.
Yeah.
It's really important that people, I think, because they're coming to us for an opinion, and it's important that they believe that we understand what we're talking about, and we spend a huge amount of time with the banks and the lenders. So, of course, we have two sides to our business. There's the client, but there's the banks. And I think coming from a bank and having empathy for what's involved in running a bank is really important because, again, without the bank relationships, we can't help our clients. So we're very, very close and understanding. And when we say these things and have these honest conversations and we give them advice and feedback, it's not blind feedback.
Sure.
We're confident in doing so, that we're doing so in a measured, responsible fashion because we talk to the banks every day.
Yeah.
I was in Melbourne last week for 2 days talking to banks, asking what they're saying, ingesting that. And again, that's what gives our team the confidence to actually give opinions and not fence sit.
Yeah.
Because we're very confident, we're really tied into the market. And again, that's what I think clients love with us, is that we're not just transacting for them, it's what do you think? And whether we're right or wrong, they understand that we're applying our opinion in a measured way, and I think they thank us for that.
Yeah, I have no doubt. So from being a Polish immigrant to being hugely successful, having an entrepreneurial spirit, Adam, thank you so much for your time. This has been great to have a chat with you, and wishing you all the very best in the future for the business as it's currently going. I don't think you're going to need my wishes to continue to succeed, but thank you again.
No, absolute pleasure, Martin. And again, thank you for what you've done for me over the years. Many of my great clients came from you in your world. So again, I'm very thankful and
thank you.
Great to be here.
Good on you. Thank you. Well, that's the end of this episode. So thank you for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation with Adam, and we'll see you next week.
Martin's Place is brought to you by Ortus Financial, Australia's most influential lending advisory and broking business. Insightful, trusted, yours.